Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. You're very welcome. John North here in the garden route of South Africa on the southern tip of the continent. And with GRI, it's my pleasure to welcome and support today's session alongside my colleague Marietta, who's also based in Georgia, but sitting in a different venue because we have an interesting thing over here called load shedding, which means that sometimes we don't all have electricity. We'll do a little bit of housekeeping, and then if need be, just a short round of introductions, and then get straight into the discussion based on the questions that's been received. We are recording the session because, of course, there's some students that cannot join live. So just so that you're aware of that. Please ensure, in terms of your name on Zoom, that we can see who you are. We'd like to encourage you to use the chat function as well. And then just a short invite for all of you to stay connected to the GRI. If you haven't done so yet, feel free to join our LinkedIn page, follow us on X or Twitter, sign up to the newsletter on our website. We'd love to stay in touch with everyone who's on this course. So, according to my reports, unless it's changing, we have today the following panelists, and I'll add to the names if there's anyone else. I'm not going to introduce them in detail, but just to say thank you very much to Brandy and Travis, all professors at Colorado, James, the director at Loyola Marymount, Professor Raquel Campos, who I think is joining us in a few minutes, Dr. Sheila Killian at Limerick, Professor Tony Watson, and of course Danielle Grant at Leadership Global. We received a number of questions, including some questions from the lecturers and the professors. And the way we thought we would do this today is to invite those on the panel to put up their hand using the reaction function. So if you're on Zoom, there should be a button for reactions. When you click on that, there should be an option for raising your hand. And the way I thought we could do this is to work through these questions as they appear. If we haven't done so, Marietta, can we maybe just share the link to the slides in the chat, just so everyone can see it at their end as well? But to basically work through these questions, and as the questions come up, we could ask our panelists to put up their hands if they are already prepared to provide some input or a response to that particular question. Also, if there are any additional questions that have perhaps not made it onto the classroom, feel free to post those in the chat. And then we'll try to manage it properly. I'll try and keep us honest in terms of time. I think that's from our end. I'm going to ask that we open the floor with this very first question around how companies might balance the short-term costs of implementing sustainability measures in their supply chains with the long-term benefits financially and environmentally. And so I'm going to stop sharing from my end. We'll make sure the slide link is in the chat, and ask our panelists to put up their hands if they're ready to start responding. And I see Sheila is ringing. Please go ahead and unmute yourself.
I'll go. I think this is an interesting question. And in some ways, it's a false dichotomy. Because when you look at managing your supply chain, it's not necessarily a long-term thing. If you can think of it as risk management, something can go wrong in your supply chain tomorrow morning, and having remediated it is not necessarily addressing a long-term cost. It can be quite short-term. So I think that it's really urgent for companies to manage risk in their supply chain and to implement sustainability measures there. I think if it's framed in terms of risk management and in terms of integrity of what they're promising to their stakeholders, it gets rid of this long-term, short-term dichotomy. The difficulty in framing it in long-term, short-term, and some things are like solar panels, upfront cost, long-term delivery. The difficulty is that many companies make their financial decisions and evaluate their projects using discounted cash flow and payback periods. And so if they start to see the sustainability as all belonging in the long-term box, then they see it as nice to have, but I don't need to do it because I'm getting on with life here. Whereas if they actually see it rather in terms of risk management, which is just a shift in perspective, they see the value of it more immediately. So I think it's a perspective issue is how I would frame it.
Thank you, Sheila. Moving on to Danielle and then Brandy. And you're going to have to unmute yourself, Danielle.
Yeah, I can echo what Sheila says. It is a matter of perspective. There are too many companies that still adhere to the old American joke of, I don't think of this company as being in business for 25 years. I think of it as 100 quarters. And there is a shift in mindset that we need to stop thinking about jam on our bread today, but think about the way that businesses are run more holistically. We've all seen companies crash and burn because of short-termism, and we have to look at things in more of a balanced scorecard way. There is a purpose which is not only about being profitable, but being sustainably profitable. And maybe that means sacrificing, maximizing profitability in each quarter, but looking at the whole business cycle as a more long-term thing that is multifaceted and not just driven at immediate shareholder value. So it is a perspective thing. I would agree with you, Sheila, there.
Yeah, so maybe I can add a couple comments as well. I think all of us, I think the intentions for most organizations is to drive sustainability initiatives. And there's lots of ways to do that within corporations, but the reality, I think, is most companies have to answer on a quarterly basis to their shareholders. And because that's such an immediate short-term requirement, there is a balancing act I think companies need to walk through. Some of the ways that they can do that, there are some things that you can look at on a short-term basis. And my slice obviously is through a supply chain window, but there's things, energy reduction, which actually helps from a short-term ROI, water reduction, waste management, and some other things that can be done to show some measurable improvements. But at the end of the day, I think organizations that are the most successful really embed sustainability into their strategy, their long-term strategy, and they set aside funding for that capacity from a longer-term perspective. Although I think there's a strong desire to move in this direction. If there are answerable results to shareholders, that really creates a strain from a reality perspective. That's what I think from a lot of corporate public companies have to deal with. When you're a private company, you obviously have a little bit more ability to focus more long-term without the quarterly scrutiny. But I think that's what some companies have done. And I've seen successful companies who embed sustainability not as a one-off project in their organization, but really embed it in their strategy or their overall long-term corporate goals. And then they measure it that way. That's where they're going to see the most success. And then the only other thing I would add is I think we're moving now. The trend is from putting out there your targets and actually starting to see measurable results. And that is also creating a bit more of a strain, particularly when you have to answer to shareholders, because if your carbon footprint isn't really reducing and some of the things you put in place, you've made commitments and you're not hitting those numbers, that is another strain that I think companies are starting to see today. So it is about balancing act, that's for sure.
Thanks, Brandon. Just before we hear from Tony and then from Jade, you've already touched on that now in terms of where is the focus of sustainability leaning towards? So where is it trending towards? So maybe I can ask other panelists to start thinking about that. Tony, and then Jeff. Please go ahead.
So adding on to what has already been discussed by Sheila, Daniel, and Randy. So what I think is from a corporate perspective, it depends on how you look at things. So when I say how you look at things, there's a difference between how an owner looks at business and how a manager looks at business. So when you look at it from a CEO's perspective, if that CEO is a manager, most of the time it is short-term perspective because the CEO is looking at his or her own incentives. That CEO will look at a 5-year, 10-year paradigm and would like to maximize profitability and not look at the long-term association in terms of building something for the customer base. How do you take the customer base to the next level? But when you look at it from an owner's perspective, from an entrepreneurial perspective, there's a different dimension that it opens up. So you look at it long-term because there's a difference in terms of how people look at your business today vis-a-vis how people look at your business from a long-term perspective. Also, Gen Z right now and all for Gen Alpha going forward is looking at businesses differently in terms of their association, their values that they bring onto the table, and so on and so forth. Government regulation also plays a very critical role. So in terms of the government regulations, in terms of customer expectations, and in terms of how different trade channels play together, because there's a lot of upline, downline kind of trade-offs which happen. So how does trade circles play it together? These would define in terms of your short-term strategy vis-a-vis your long-term strategy. And there's a very important blend that organization has to look at. Unfortunately, nobody knows where that fine line is, but that's how collectively everybody has to figure out in the board of any organization as to what would amount to a good, strong short-term strategy, which would look at profitability and continuity and pave the way for long-term sustainability in future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony. I know, Jeff, you had your hand up. I don't know if you wanted to come in here or whether we can move on to where we see the trends going.
No, I just a couple of brief comments. I think and this is one of the purposes that we try to achieve in this program, is one of the first questions we all need to ask ourselves is how are we framing the issue? And is the framing that we're bringing to the question robust enough, both to how we should engage the question and how business is engaging the question? So we get into these profit versus sustainability. That's one kind of framing. Another kind of framing that we're using in this conversation is structures of ownership, and the default is publicly traded companies. And that's one kind of ownership model. I'm thinking of a venture capital owned company in Southern California, Ingram Micro. It's a $55 billion tech company. They're doing significant things in supply chain. They moved to venture capital ownership, but that they did not lose a beat in that, and they actually propelled that because of the commitment of their leadership. Obviously, we understand B Corp, we understand social entrepreneurship. There's a number of different ownership structures that reframe and bring different perspectives to this very question. So I think as we're asking any question, what are the questions behind the questions or that set up the questions, and are they appropriate to the way in which we're trying to understand more broadly the dynamics that's happening related to business and sustainability?
Thank you very much, Jeff. So at this point, and maybe what I've just done is I've renumbered the questions on that slide just so we can see which ones are question 2 and 3. But Randy's already started touching on it. I think the other responses is also heading in that direction, that we're starting to see where sustainability as a practice and as a philosophy is starting to lean towards. And perhaps maybe related to that, then question 3, what are some of the successful efforts that we've seen across the globe around companies managing or at least making progress on a sustainable transformation? So I'm going to ask whether there's anyone who's prepared to put up their hand and give us a view in terms of where it's leading to, and perhaps what do you think, what successful transitions you have seen? Question 2 or 3. And we can perhaps come back to that if there isn't any immediate. You've got lots of questions that we can chip with. Great.
Yeah.
Listen to, sorry, if you could just use the reaction button because I don't always see that.
Yeah. No, I would. It's just that I had the chat open and the reaction button disappeared on me.
Okay, please go.
Figured to do it. No, I think probably a really good example, which I know you'll have covered with the session that came from Antwerp, is Interface Floor. And you look at that as a carpet company, which started off in a fairly filthy industry and then said, okay, how can we do this a little better? How can we be a little cleaner? How can we become slightly more sustainable? Then they become circular and then they become regenerative. That's a company that has a nice journey while still being like a multi-million euro company. It's not an either or. And it's a nice example of how what might have seemed like long-term thinking saves them a fortune. So I think Interface Floor is a nice example of successful efforts towards sustainable transition. Their story is mainly around the environmental sort of dimension of sustainability. And I think it's important to also consider the social. I think the focus of sustainability is leaning heavily on the environmental right now because of climate change. And I do think that with the number of wars and conflict in the world and the amount of migration and displaced people, that social and particularly people is something that will become more of an issue in the next couple of years.
Thanks. Just checking if there are any other hands anyone else would like to add to that. Brandon?
Yeah, I'll try to. So there's a couple companies I've worked for that I think have done a nice job. I've got them in my module information. Honeywell in particular has actually started to tackle scope 1 and scope 2 in the early 2000s before I think it was really a well-known initiative. And they've actually developed their metrics that the industry is using as well. I think they're still trying to tackle scope 3. Another company that I'm familiar with, Equinix, is a data warehouse organization where their primary costs is energy. So, and running these warehouse operations. So they've made a lot of progress in using reusable energy. And I think they actually are able to capture their scope 3. I was looking through their sustainability report from last year. And so I think there's lots and lots of companies that are making progress. I think, like I said, there's strain on the short-term stakeholder result-oriented focus, particularly when I think the carbon credit initiative and tracking that and actually seeing carbon reduction based on that has some challenges to it. And so some regrouping in certain areas, but I think a lot of companies are making great progress. And they say you make progress in what you track and measure. And I think that is the progress so far. And now shifting from making commitments to actually delivering on these kind of commitments that were made a couple of years ago and see where the shift is going forward.
Thanks. Raquel, you're next.
Yeah. Hi. I will not share a concrete example of companies or other types of organizations, but in terms of trends, one of the things that I think is worth looking into is the interests that companies are increasingly having about the world of impact investing, which is a world that I've been being closer to in the last years. I've been participating in a yearly event organized by Impact Europe that some of you may know. And that organization is trying to create a yearly space that has been increasingly having not only the typical participants like social enterprises and foundations wanting to invest in the social impact arena, but also companies from various sectors wanting to understand, and also, of course, funds, international funds, European funds, wanting to understand better the world of social impact. At the same time, and I think that there is what I often call a kind of a hybridization process happening, which means that increasingly companies are trying to also include in their focus the social impact area, the social area, and also, of course, the environmental, which is easier because especially you have laws to abide with, and the impetus is more immediate into that arena. At the same time, I think that in terms of trends, of course, that if you're in Europe, you have to look into the amount of legislation that has been coming across companies, especially large companies. But at the same time, I think that it is going to be kind of a slow process because we have lots of resistance on the part of companies and of countries to cooperate and respond to those demands. As you have probably seen, the resistance of agricultures, naming a sector, the resistance of Germany and Italy. And so I think it's going to be a very slow process, even maybe slower than we as citizens would like to see. And finally, another trend on that I have been seeing is in fact related with the last theme on partnerships. And in fact, there are problems that we can depict from the SDG goals, for instance, linked with marine resources and health of the sea and so on, that and many others, and perhaps all of SDGs are connected with increasingly complex issues. And those issues are so complex that, in fact, only if companies partner with NGOs and with local authorities and so on, are we able to really start solving those complex issues. Um, and that's, I don't want to extend myself too much, but I've been seeing and lots of examples of cross-sector partnerships that have been particularly interesting in terms of trying to start and devise innovative solutions towards the more complex problems in the world. So I shared a few of them in my second video in the last topic. Maybe some of you haven't had time yet to see that, and I would invite you to see those. But many other are, of course. But okay. So that's thanks.
Thank you, Raquel. And I'm just going to ask, I know Tony and Jeff had their hands up. If we could just keep these final comments on this section very brief, because I'd like us to move on to the next slide. If there's anything to add in addition to what's not been said, Tony?
Yeah, I'll quickly take an example of an Indian company which started as an iron ore manufacturing company. They went on to acquire Chorus a couple of decades back, and now it's a Tata Group from India, and they are now into EV. They also have their corporate head office, which focuses on a lot of SDG-centric activities. They are also investors, and they have completely dedicated their line of business towards sustainability and circularity. So that is one example that, in the interest of time, I'm keeping it short. Second aspect is, I have a student who is right now doing PhD in Germany with TU Munich. And interestingly, he has a program which he conducts in Germany as well as in India. And this is to reduce the carbon footprint. And that entire project, it's a 10 million euro project. And that entire project has been funded by Deutsche Bank. So the reason they funded it is because Deutsche Bank is an investor with certain companies, and they want to reduce the carbon footprint of those companies. So they're basically trying to use the neutrality concept in terms of sustainable driving SDGs in different parts of the globe and offsetting the carbon emissions which are happening in some of the other industries where they are funded. So the investors are looking at it very seriously. They're looking at it from a long-term perspective. in terms of both continuity as well as sustainability. And end of the day, stock markets is a reflection of sentiments. So if the sentiments are high, the stocks show up. And that's about it. So it's not that they are very interested in SDGs, but yes, looking at the people's sentiment and how stock markets behave, it's to their own interest that they tweak things and they invest in ventures which are more oriented towards SDGs and ESG compliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tony. Nicole, was that something you wanted to add just in
Yes.
close?
Yes, it's very quick. For example, I would invite you to search for the companies that the European Investment Bank Foundation has been highlighting as the best projects yearly. They're quite innovative, a bit of startup projects, but very interesting, very innovative. And I think that we should follow on what will be the projects that the European Investment Bank itself will be funding in the future, because they are currently developing a study to understand exactly what are the best criteria to choose the innovative companies to invest in. Be that what they are interested is in supporting companies devoted to social and environmental issues while developing economic activity, of course.
Thank you. So I would suggest if we move on to questions 4 and 5. We've tried to group them. I'm not sure we have the headings entirely correct, but the first one deals with, or the two questions deals with emissions and environmental impact, asking what are the most significant barriers to accurate Scope 3 emission calculations and what innovative solutions could potentially address these challenges. And then the second question related to that around the current limitations in carbon offset quantification and application, and what alternative strategies companies could consider to balance their footprints. It's around those. And I see Sheila already has her hand up. Sheila, I don't know if you would like to kick us off.
You're on mute.
Sorry, I got to get a t-shirt with apologies. That one, it does speak to accounting, and you can answer this question about specifically Scope 3 emission calculations, but it also addresses other areas of people's responsibility, particularly in the social sustainability. And the barriers are things like poor data, many different ways of calculating the data, multiple standards, having companies in the supply chain that are smaller and less resourced, so they're not gathering the data, or who don't think it's important, so they're not gathering the data. So it makes it quite difficult to actually calculate and measure. And as an accountant, obviously, I think you should be measuring things you care about. But in terms of the innovative solutions, there are two, and the second part, like alternatives, like given that it's difficult. There's definitely scope for tech in this, blockchain and so on. In supply chain, technology will really help with measuring carbon emissions. But in terms of, given that it's difficult, what else can companies do? My short answer would be broad strokes. Even if you can't specifically measure exactly what your carbon footprint is from, for instance, travel, or from how far your goods travel, you know that the less travel, the lower the carbon. That, like the way we as individuals know, the less meat we eat, the lower our carbon footprint is, even if we haven't calculated out the actual impact of the next chicken nugget that we might want to tuck into. So I think in the absence of very specific details, companies can move in the right direction and wait for the technology to catch up that will allow them to calculate more accurately. So that would be my answer to those two.
Thanks, Sheila. Is there anyone else who'd like to chime in on that? Okay. If not, then I suggest that we move on to the next question, which we've noted as number 5. Broadly speaking, deals with green jobs, skills, and investments. So the questions that we had there were, what are the implications of the growing demand for so-called green jobs, outpacing the supply? how might educational institutions and businesses respond in that context? And then there was another question around, given the need for substantial investment in green economy initiatives, what are the most effective ways to secure funding support for these projects? So it's around developing not only the human skills, but also the financial capacity for driving transformation. Is there anyone who would like to take the first stab at responding to either one of those elements? Tony? You can just unmute yourself.
Looking at the funding options, so first range of funding would come from government, because any government would be interested to spiral up the activities in rural areas, and green jobs are primarily in rural areas. It's to the interest because the larger cities are getting clogged with traffic. So you have to spread out the population. You have to go reach out to the rural areas so that you create jobs over there. So the first interest of stakeholder interest comes from government. So there's a lot of government funding which goes into rural activation of green projects. Second is investors themselves, because the more the penetration, the more the consumption. The more the consumption, the more the profitability. The more the profitability, the more the investors reap dividends. So to their own interest, the investors also are looking at going to the grassroots level and trying to provide for means so that industries and green industries, especially, are mushrooming in these rural areas or semi-urban areas. So these are the two major stakeholders. Conglomerates and corporations, which are also functional, also want to reach out to these areas in terms of their supply chain network, and especially backward integration, because it makes sense in a VUCA world. It makes sense to have your own backward integration, because everybody is playing in terms of their margin, and you can't increase the prices in a world that we live in where we are all hit by inflation. It is cost leadership that matters. And if you have to have cost leadership, you need to align to your backward integration strategies. And that also, kind of in a circular fashion, moves forward as a forward integration, because you are building future customers, because your urban areas are going to only consume as much. So beyond the point, it's your rural customers who are going to come back and become your customer. So you're doing your backward integration, and in long-term perspective, also building your front-end customers, additional customers. That's how I look at it. And in terms of the jobs, there are plenty that are coming up in terms of agricultural sector, in terms of animal husbandry, in terms of, say, for example, horticulture, in terms of a lot of micro industries that are set up, which are feeder industries to these large industries, which could be in urban or semi-urban areas. So there are a lot of jobs. Skills is something which we need to focus upon. And there are institutions which are looking at skill enhancements. There are lower level government-centric organizations and NGOs that foster skill development and enhancement. And there are these, in India especially, we have cottage industry forums, which are run by various NGOs, especially women-supported, who look at upliftment of women and engaging women in the mainstream, integrating them onto the mainstream, because they come up with various innovative products and which are pretty much marketable in today's connected world using digital technology. So you can directly have a product like, for example, a handmade paper or a handmade soap, which comes as a fragment of a cost in a rural establishment, is shipped globally. And that has its own customer base and people who appreciate that kind of a product available globally. So it opens up a vast arena of economic activities. It opens up opportunities for rural masses to amass some wealth, as well as upliftment of all stakeholders. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tony. I'm just, whilst there isn't anyone that's put up their hand yet from the panelist side, I just want to draw your attention to the message I've just posted in the chat, but I'll just voice it as well. It would be wonderful also to hear from the students on the call. If you have any other questions or reactions or anything that you'd like to share in terms of what's resonating with you from what's already been discussed in this first half hour, please put up your hand. And if you're able to, you're more than welcome also to share your video. Please don't be shy. It'd be wonderful to hear some other voices as well.
Yeah, and I would just echo that, John. If any of the students or panelists, if you watch someone else's module and a question emerged from that. It doesn't have to be related to a question that we've posed. We want this to be a learning opportunity for the students, and feel free to use the time we have to ask any questions, piggybacking off of questions today or things you've seen or heard in the modules.
Until someone's prepared to put up their hand, I think there was, in question number 5, there was also some reference to how educational institutions can respond. And of course, with this being a collaborative course that's co-hosted, co-presented by 8 institutions globally, I'd like to think that what we are starting to see is increasing collaboration, not only amongst institutions, but also with companies to try and change the rules of the game, so to speak. But maybe there's someone who would like to respond. I know Raquel, sorry, Tony, we've just heard from you. If you wouldn't mind, I'm going to ask Raquel maybe to go first.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah. I think that there are lots of things to be done at the various levels, graduates, undergraduates, executive education, and so on. So one of the efforts that we have been doing this last, especially 5 years, is to try to reflect in all the subjects the theme of sustainability. So instead of having a separate course on that issue, we have been integrating that at undergraduate level and also at other levels. And one of the things that also I think is really important is to do partnerships between and among different schools in one campus. So one of the things that we have been doing is to forge partnerships with the biotechnology school, for instance, and also the law school, with our business school in our campus. And there was a hub that was created, which is called the Insure Hub. And through the Insure Hub, courses and consultancy has been offered to the community, with the aim first to set the theme and develop the theme of circular economy, which is something with which the biotechnology school works a lot. And we have been partnering with them since the beginning because they always needed to have projects on an economic perspective, because one thing is really to be in the lab and find one way to use the byproducts of one company as a raw material to another, but a different thing is to make the project viable and to market it and so on. In brief, I would say that not only it is really very important to challenge all students at all levels, especially from the economics and business perspective, in all the courses, to challenge them to reflect on sustainability issues and how from different functions and contents you should contribute and reflect on these issues. But at the same time, the schools themselves should try to engage as much as possible with other schools in order to be more able to give an effective contribute to society. And I think that is really very important, to be able to set up projects that are transversal, that go across fields, in order for us to be better able to support then society in problems solutions.
Thanks for the comment. Travis?
Yeah. So I think Raquel said a lot of the good stuff I was going to say. So great answer. I do think this is such a global topic, right? It's unrealistic that in my opinion, that any one university or business school, so to Raquel's point, business schools need to work with other colleges on their campuses. But even still, Colorado State has leaned into sustainability, and we like to think we're really good at it, but it's unrealistic to think we have all the answers. And so a collaboration like what we're doing here, and so kudos to John and the GRLI for pulling these various universities together, and for the students to recognize this is a novel experience. And I say novel, unfortunately it's novel, because get on my soapbox here for a second. I think this is where higher ed needs to go to stay relevant and to be able to tackle a global topic like sustainability. It's going to take multiple universities working together to be able to do that. And so students in this class, hopefully you're able to pull experts from around the globe on a particular topic that's in this umbrella of sustainability. And I think higher ed needs to continue to do that. It's a challenge, right? And you have to break out of your mindset that we have all the answers or we're competing against other universities for students and resources, et cetera. We have to break out of that to be able to solve this problem. But I think you see such benefits from doing that the first time you dip your toe in the water and collaborate with other universities, that the pros of doing so outweigh any cons that may exist. And so my hope is that things like what we're doing here become the norm, and then that benefits the students, and things like visiting professors, bringing those experts to different campuses. It's where we need to go. And I think we've just scratched it a little bit with this initiative, but hopefully this is where higher ed can go going forward.
Yeah, just as we hand over to Brandy, I just want to actually echo that, that leading beyond the logo, so to speak, I think is very much what's needed.
And the only thing I would add, and maybe this is a bit more from a practical standpoint, that universities can do to help students be prepared for the green jobs, is just really the G in ESG is to help students understand the current trends globally, because a lot of that is changing. A lot of governance objectives are changing, and be prepared to walk into organizations and be the expert. A lot of companies are not focused. And so when they hire folks for green jobs, they're expecting those folks who just got a degree in that field to be the expert for the company. And so I think universities can help students be very prepared to walk in with the latest information and knowledge, so that they can start to spread that information. And even though they may not be an expert in the space, I think a lot of organizations be expecting them to be an expert. So I think that's a way that a lot of universities can help students be prepared for those green jobs.
Right. Thanks, Tony.
Yeah, adding on to what Raquel and later on Travis expanded upon. So at Voxen, we are doing a 3-tier approach. So first is we are breaking barriers. So when I talk of breaking barriers, students in the preschool would only be able to do so much because they're management graduates. But then when you look at it, not as a solo component, but as a extension of the university, there's so much more that one can do. So what we have done is we have broken down the silo of individual schools. We are collaborating. So there's a collaboration with School of Technology, there's collaboration with School of Law, School of Biotechnology, and so on and so forth. So how that helps is we have centers of excellence. So all these centers of excellence basically are looking at one particular problem and trying to solve that particular problem. And that in turn gets connected to the second aspect, which is the corporate social responsibility. or the CSR initiative. So apparently we have adopted 2 villages wherein we are training people free of cost, and we are creating an impact in terms of them having an understanding of what SDGs are, what ESG is, how do they set up their own businesses from a legal perspective, how do they look at things, from a compliance perspective, how do they look at things. We are helping them bridge the financial gaps and trying to bring in resources to them so that they can mobilize their ideas and bring investors who can listen to their pitch decks and invest onto these smaller ventures. So that's what we are trying to achieve. And then building upon what Bandy had said, we also send our students as mentor of change. So they go on to various organizations, smaller organizations, and they also go to rural areas first to understand and then to convert that understanding onto a successful venture. So how it helps is these are social entrepreneurship ventures that we carry out. And when the student passes out, not only with their grade cards, but also with umpteen amount of experience, on ground experience, they know the challenges which they have faced, they know how to build upon it, and they know how to impress upon a larger audience and a big company and to convert an opportunity onto a successful project. So that's what we are doing in a three-tier approach. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tony. And I see Raquel's got something to add before we move on.
Yes, it's connected with this last thing that Tony was referring to. One of the opportunities that universities have is to engage with service learning experiences, which is something that we have done the last couple of years. Here, it's not only the business school, but other schools also. And it's very interesting. I'm particularly engaged with one experience with our undergraduate students. So instead of them developing analysis of companies and do it on their desks as desk research and doing one interview or two with managers, what they are going is they are going to the ground, and not typically to companies, but to social organizations, and trying to understand the problem and engage with the organization in the solution of a particular problem, which is interesting because their energy, motivation, and is higher, and their willingness to mobilize their knowledge is also higher. So that's another way to really work with students towards the solution of social problems, specifically here.
Thank you. And I'm sure, given the number of educators on the call today, we can continue with this conversation quite a bit. And also, thank you to those who've added some further comments on the chat. I'm sure that I'll just very briefly, for those that can't see the chat, Travis is underlining the need to interface even more closely with companies in order to stay connected to what they are doing. Sheila is also pointing out that with the standards and regulations changing so rapidly, it's important to understand the underlying and underpinning principles and the direction of travel, because things in terms of standards change so often. And then Danielle's pointing to the need to embed in the DNA of the company the more fundamental values, because it can be so easily become a box-ticking exercises rather than in alignment with the purpose, the principles, the values, and the behaviors. So thank you very much for those further comments. The next question is an interesting one. It deals with, that's question 6, it deals with technology and innovation in sustainability. Question broadly, what technological advancements that we're seeing or currently most impactful in advancing sustainability goals, and what are the emerging technologies to watch? And then more specifically, how can digital transformation businesses be leveraged to enhance ESG practices? So I don't know if there's anyone who would like to start with that. I have a particular view from the work that we're doing on this question, and I'll go after Sheila.
Yeah, go if you like, Joe. Okay. No, I was only going to say there's often when people think of the technologies for sustainability, their mind automatically goes to the environmental aspect of sustainability, where you're looking at things like sensors and you're looking at drones and measurement, and those are really valid. But it's also useful to think of the technology that's good in social areas. So healthcare technology, for example, wearable tech, the kind of technology that works with, say, people with dementia, or that automatically monitors like diabetes and so on, and educational technology that expands the reach of education. And you can have technology that tracks sort of questionable products like fast fashion and so on. And you look at the tech that is around tracking things like conflict metals and conflict diamonds. So technology can really help in the supply chain. There's lots of good technology innovation. You can't talk about emerging tech and sustainability without talking about AI. And that is a good way of looking at how technology is double-edged, because all of the technology that is for good can also be for bad. Even the over-monitoring of employees can be for bad. The AI and facial recognition can have racial bias built into it. In terms of the second part, how can digital transformation in business be leveraged to enhance ESG practices and sustainability in general? I think looking at the ethical foundations of technology development, particularly around AI, facial recognition, how it's used by government, these things are really important, and that people love tech. They love new toys. They love applying new toys. It's very important to consider what exactly is going on ethically and with an equality point of view with the tech before jumping in to start to use it.
Thanks. So since I promised, I'm just going to quickly jump in here before we go to Tony and Jack, just to build actually on what Sheila has said. My two cents really is just that, at least for where I sit, that we need to broaden our perspective when we think about innovation and technology to also include social technologies, in other words, ways of constructing societal norms, practices, that brings a different technology or a different approach, but also not only think about technological innovation, but relational innovation. In other words, innovations in how we relate to our own selves, to others, and the planet. So the kind of innovation that is needed, very much, at least from my perspective, is a more relational innovation and not only a technological innovation. I think that was simply the bit that kind of triggered for me in that question. Let's move to Tony and then Jeff.
Yeah, Sheila has put it very in an elaborate way, and she has encompassed a whole lot of arena, which is awesome. Just adding to that, normally when we talk of technology, what comes to our mind is high tech, cutting edge technology. But seldom does it come to our mind that it could be low tech as well. And that is one point that I want to emphasize upon. In India, right now, we are talking of something called Indian knowledge system. So those technologies which are long lost. So I'll just give you an example. There's a lot of carbon footprint which is created because we are a warm country, and especially in summers, and we are in the peak of summer. So we use air conditioners, we use refrigerators, which most of us use. But then if you look at era which was long bygone, there was no refrigerators or air conditioners. People had their own ways and means of combating the heat waves. So there are technologies which are available, which are low-tech technologies, and most of it is in the rural areas and the cottage industry field. So it is high time that we look at low-tech in the interest of sustainability. We also look at low-tech technologies which has been there and they have solved people's problems, humans' problems from time eternity, until unless the corporations came in and they messed up everything and trying to reset it from zero right now. So thank you so much.
Jay? Yeah, I just add, I don't know the exact number. I was at a talk the other night and they reference this, but really it's the question, when we talk about technology, we're assuming an increase of computer usage and the ability for our current both computer systems and especially our energy systems to support what they think will be the increase through AI is a significant issue. There was some statistic, don't quote me on this, but it was like, if it was a 6% use now, it's going to go to 25%, some major increase really of energy demand to support what is expected through AI. Looking at the power of technology, but also what are the demands and the costs inherent in the use of technology and how is that being managed?
Thanks, Jed. Unless there are any other immediate reflections, I still haven't heard from any of the students. So I'm just checking if anyone who's prepared at this stage to maybe add some of your insights. We know that many of the students on the call are very experienced and have very rich learning to share. So please go ahead. Courtney.
Hi, I'm Courtney, joining from Colorado State. And I just have a question about how brands can authentically talk about sustainability to customers without being accused of greenwashing. I think once a company starts those conversations, there's extra scrutiny on them. They're not doing it enough. I think there's a responsibility from companies to educate consumers, but there's also pressure on consumers to push companies to become more sustainability. So I'm from the marketing realm, so it's a topic like how do brands tell those stories authentically without causing backlash and more issues or PR scandals with if they're doing their best, but not perfect, right?
I'm really sorry I've got the chat open again. I raised my hand. It's a great question. And I was going to say, being honest, Courtney, and the GRLI slogan of think big, act small, start now. Not overclaiming, not dashing in saying we're awesome. Just starting to say, okay, we're moving towards this and being as open as possible.
Brad.
Yeah, it is a good question, actually. I think it aligns with a lot of the, we'll call it resistance and pushback and those kind of things that companies are seeing, their short-term ROI resistance as well. I think it all ties together and it's a journey, right? So some organizations have started earlier than others, but you're right. A lot of companies put themselves out there first, tend to be where people focus, and then maybe there's some scrutiny there. I've always found that measurable and actionable result accomplishment is the best way to counter that. And I mentioned Honeywell before, but a lot of the sustainable reporting that companies do is really just measuring the fact that they're measuring it, that they're working on it. And that's those were some of the first metrics that were used in some of these reports. And I think where we are in that journey as a global community is getting past that. It's great that we're measuring it. I think all companies now, there's a high percentage of companies now that have their sustainability reports and are starting to track that information. But what are we seeing from a results standpoint is probably the best way in my mind to combat that, even if there's metrics that you've improved on, waste reduction, I think in your case, but water reduction, some of these other things, energy reduction, reusable usage of the energy that you're using, and wherever we can drive actual results. We'll help that story.
So, Travis?
Yeah. Courtney, it's a very interesting question from a marketing perspective. So how I look at it is it has to be a binary, right? Either the company believes and does what they do, or they greenwash, and that's where the dichotomy is. Now, if I look at a scale, you are somewhere in between maybe, or you are on both the extreme poles, right? So there are two things here. One is what you communicate. And second is how people look at that communication, whether they buy that communication or they don't buy that communication. That's how marketing is, right? So either it's a hit or a flop. My take would be that involve the tribe. And that's the new age of branding. That's the new age of marketing. Involve the tribe. Even if you aren't doing much today. And I'm assuming this for people who have an intent and who wants to do something and are absolutely clueless as to where to begin. And it's difficult. It's quite difficult to align your practices, age-old practices, systems, processes, and suddenly make it sustainable, suddenly aligning it to SDGs. From an operational matrix perspective, it's quite time-consuming as well as resource-consuming. So I look at it as open it up to the masses to leverage on your promotional activities. Call for ideas from people, your consumers, your loyal customer base. Call for ideas, and people will be much more receptive to this form of an engagement. And they would stop looking at it from the lens of a surveyor or a reviewer, and they would start engaging with you with open mind and heart. And that's exactly what you want. So you build that engagement with them, and while sharing their ideas and maybe incentivizing some of the people who come up with wonderful ideas, and then slowly and steadily start looking at how do you incorporate those ideas onto real life practices. So this builds on your element of trust, element of testimonials that you have, and the tribe methodology really works because it has a snowballing effect.
Yeah, I'll go quick. The word Sheila used around authentic, I think, is really key. And transparency might be another one, right? Of being honest about where you're at. And I think it's okay to say we're on a journey, right, of sustainability, and here's what we've done so far, and here's what we need to do. My college-age son was applying to an internship this week, and he sent me the job description, and the place where he was applying had in there, and all companies, they've had some missteps along the way. And in the job description, they alluded to that. They said, we're on a journey as an organization, and we're looking for people to join our organization who can help us in our journey. And I think we've all made mistakes as individuals and as organizations. We may not be where we want to be yet. So, Courtney, I guess I would say, like I teach in a leadership class, be authentic to who you are as a leader. I think as an organization, you need to be authentic about where you might be and where you still have work to go. And I think if you're honest, most consumers, I think, are at least more willing to give an organization the benefit of the doubt if they're honest. If they are truly greenwashing, right, then you're setting yourself up for critical eye.
Anthony, you just need to unmute yourself.
Yes. Really, I think that the last two have said most of it, but it is about not trying to pretend you're doing something that you're not. Because lying, my mother taught me one thing that I've never forgotten. The worst truth is better than the best lie. And being honest with you, and I come from a marketing background as well. I was sales and marketing director at Disney many moons ago. And not over promising and under delivering. Just promise what you can deliver and be truthful about it. People are more understanding. I think one of the issues is that instead of giving the task of communicating this journey that companies hopefully are on, they give it to people that are just there to tick the CSR boxes and put something in their annual report, even if they don't really believe in it. And that undermines the veracity of it. But we have a great example in the UK in our Prince of Wales, Prince William, that has put his money and his efforts and his own behaviour where his mouth is in terms of his Earthshot prize. And I don't think that that anybody can disbelieve the authenticity with which he approaches this. And he's equally honest about times when his role and the things he has to do are to some extent in conflict, where he has to take aircraft, but where he has the choice, he flies commercial, not on private jets. So that level of authenticity and understanding that this isn't going to happen overnight. And the younger generation feel it's really important, but I think they would prefer a company to be honest in their communications and say, we're only at level 2 here, we want to get to level 5, and that's going to take us another 10 years, is better than them pretending.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much, Courtney, for that question, and for helping stimulate this conversation. Unless there's anyone else who would like to add to the response to what Courtney's put in the room, I'm going to hear whether there are any other questions from the students before we move to questions 7 and 8 on our slide. Okay. If nothing right now, please do feel free just to put up your hand. So question 7 and 8, I'm going to suggest that we maybe deal with them together. So question 7 asks, what are the biggest threats to worldwide awareness of a sustainability transition? And specifically alludes to taking into account different visions and frameworks, legislation and regulation that exists between Europe, the Americas, and the Eastern Bloc. I feel a little bit left out here at the southern tip of the African continent. If the question doesn't take that into account, but nonetheless, what are the threats to the worldwide awareness of the sustainability transition? And 8 is referencing the visible conflicts that we have in the world. Of course, there are more than 100 armed conflicts ongoing, but there are a few that are quite prominent at the moment. And the question was, would climate change and its challenges gain the deserved importance among political decision makers and populations, in addition to what's really going on in terms of visible conflicts? Yeah, I'm going to hear whether anyone would like to kick off. Sheila?
Yeah, and I'm glad you put those questions together, because I looked at question 7 and I thought one of the biggest challenges is war and conflict and inequality. And the fact that we can sit in Europe and America and think in universities and in comfortable offices with aircon, such, and we can address this from a very middle class perspective. And we can forget about the majority world. And they're not so one or the other. Like climate change is creating conflict, it's creating poverty and exacerbating inequality. And conflict and the whole refugee crisis is really impacting on the ability of people to address climate change and where they see it in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So I think, honestly, that I would say conflict, war, populism, a decline in trust in kind of decent institutions, and that sort of national self-interest that's on the rise, sadly, as posing a huge threat to our ability to work together to address social problems as well as environmental problems.
Jeff, I don't know if you want to add to that, maybe take a different angle.
Yeah, a couple of, I would say one of the biggest challenges is basically the conflict over more established versus developing technologies, especially in energy space. We've seen in the United States challenges related to the SEC proposal for climate-related financial disclosure. We've seen individual states remove themselves from BlackRock when BlackRock says that the climate risk is investment risk and they need to disclose that. Then a number of, frankly, Republican-leaning states are moving their investments, their retirement investments, away from BlackRock. There's a real struggle, I would say, for legacy technologies and evolving technologies and all of just the politics around all of that. So those dynamics are a real struggle. I'd say another struggle is, how do we frame the issue? So in the United States, migration and immigration is a significant issue. What dimension of that are how many people are climate refugees? What's the impact of climate? How is that driving the movement of peoples? That's really not discussed at all. And so I really like the framework that Jeffrey Sachs presented at a presentation 10 years ago about what the work of sustainable development is. And it's really understanding the intersection and the nested system dynamic between 4 dimensions, which he calls the techno-economic, the earth systems, social dynamics, and governance. And to really understand sustainability, we need to understand that this is both an analytic framework. Everything we look at has to be looked at from those 4 perspectives in combination. And then it's also a normative framework, meaning we need to act such that we don't put increased strains on the pressure points among each of those dimensions. So I'd say a real struggle for us is that we frame each of these issues one-dimensionally when they're multidimensionally, and we leave out critical components of it. It has to be part of how we're really engaging our understanding of what it is we're talking about as a starting.
Thanks. Tony's got his hand up. Tony?
Yeah, I would like to put in a differential perspective. So if you look at the world, we are trying to compete with each other. And that's where we go when we talk of war, right? So we are trying to have an upper hand compared to somebody else. However, when you look at sustainability, you have to actually coexist, cooperate, rather than compete. So these are different dimensions, psychological dimensions. So from an act of competition, you have to look at it from a competition perspective. Only then one can lead on to a sustainable practice because it's a global practice. Everybody, all stakeholders have to come together. There has to be a convergence. Until unless there's a convergence, one would try to pull a fast one on the other, be it a corporation, be it a country, be it whatever unit we decide. And it's never going to be achieved because somebody will be an outlier who will always try to have an upper hand against everybody else. And so this is a mindset basically. And as a whole, as all the corporations put together, all governments put together, it is high time that we realize that going to Mars is not a solution, but working towards a more sustainable planet is going to be a solution.
I'd love to hear from some of the students. If there's anyone who's got some views on this, feel free to add your comments either in the chat or just put up your hand. And also any further reflections from those on the panel. I'll maybe just briefly, while we wait for someone to put up their hand, I take perhaps again a slightly more philosophical perspective on this. If I was pressed with this moment in time to summarize what I believe to be the biggest threat right now, it would be, I would use the word disconnection. We seem to have disconnected from our humanity to some extent in the way that we've organized our economies, our economic activity, but we also disconnected from the planet to a large extent. So we don't necessarily know where our food comes from. Many of us aren't able to grow our food. So disconnection, I think, from our own humanity, from others in meaningful relationship, and from the planet in a regenerative and restorative way. But in any case, I'm sure there may be some other views here, either around the biggest threats or around prioritization of these issues. If nothing at this stage, there are 3 more questions that I think to some extent have been addressed in some of the responses already. So I'm not going to prioritize any one above the other. But the one basically asked, if we look at the next decade, what do we see as the most urgent issues impacting on business? The question number 10 asks whether we're seeing a shift from reporting sustainable targets to driving actual change on the ground. And then question 11 is specifically dealing with smaller organizations and what actions they might take to address responsible leadership and sustainable transformation. So in no particular order, we've got about 10 minutes or so. Randy, feel free to tackle whichever one's most prominent to you.
Yeah, I don't think we really discussed the issue in regards to carbon credits and greenhouse gas emission reduction, actual reduction, and the focus on the scope 3. And I think we're still swirling around on what the definition of that is. But I think we've all come to the conclusion that until we really understand it and can get our arms around scope 3, we're really not going to hit some of these targets that we've established for ourselves in 2030 and 2050. So I think that's probably, if you're one of the concerns, urgent issues impacting businesses and these commitments that have been made out in the future. I think that's probably one of them that's pending that needs to be looked at and resolved.
Thanks, Brandy. And maybe just as we're kind of moving to picking up the smaller pieces that are still remaining in today's panel discussion, I'm also inviting those who are who are taking part today to post in the chat any additional questions or insights that may have arisen for you during the course of this discussion, or perhaps that may feed into future discussions or into that we may want to take into account in future courses. It's going to be near impossible to provide a summative conclusion to the wide range of topics that we've covered. So the invite is there if anyone would like to post something. Okay, Jeff.
Yeah, it's just another request, but for each of our students, we each have different ways in which we have basically assessments and reviews. There's course evaluations. I've asked the LMU students to fill out the course evaluation on our learning management system, Brightspace. For those who are on this call and those who will be viewing this, please give us feedback through those mechanisms as well.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, just checking around the room if there's anything else that someone would like to add. I'm just going to briefly say something about question number 10, if I may, which is around whether we're seeing a shift from reporting sustainable targets to driving actual changes and improvement. And this is not necessarily related to only how companies report on sustainability targets, but I am seeing more, especially from kind of activist groups, questioning about this insistence on needing more data and needing more reporting. And I may get some pushback here from Sheila and those in the critical accounting space, but there does seem to be a question around whether, instead of making the necessary changes in operational practice and governance ownership, whether perhaps some are hiding behind saying that we need more data. We need more data to measure this particular thing, rather than just getting on with making the small changes that we can to actually shift the systems, right? So I am seeing a lot of that in our work as well. So it's perhaps something to call out.
I'd fully agree with that, John. I think people will always use, there's no perfect data. The perfect is the enemy of the good. We saw during the pandemic how people could move fast and take action, which was imperfect but generally effective, without waiting until they had perfect data when they thought this is actually urgent. And if that kind of thinking could be applied to other things that are actually urgent, it would be great.
Yeah, great. Because I think if there are now other immediate reflections, I think maybe I'm just checking around the room and anyone's being up there, and not at this stage. We have a small kind of custom, if you will, or a ritual, and maybe we can use that to ensure that no one has the last word, that we can all have the last word. So, I'm just going to call out the names of those on the call. If you have one word that you'd like to leave in the room before we leave, you're welcome to speak it out loud, or maybe just put it in the chat. And seeing as we've got a few on the call, I'll just call out your name, make sure everyone's unmuted. Okay, and in no particular order, it's just the way it appears on my screen. So just make sure you're unmuted. Okay. Okay. Tony.
So I think the calling is we have to all collaborate. That's how it has to
Collaborate,
work.
right?
So collaboration is the key.
Brandy.
I just thanks everyone for joining and appreciate the open dialogue. So.
Jay, picking on Sheila's just posting, common good.
Danielle.
Yeah, I think that the themes of honesty, transparency, and the common good, and leaving these thoughts in the heads of our students who will go out and have one hopes, a disproportionately positive influence on the organizations that they work in today and tomorrow. And that's why we all do this, isn't it? To hope that the ideas that we share with our students find fertile ground in them and in their organizations.
Thanks, Daniel. Slightly out of the budget, but nonetheless, wonderful. Courtney.
My word is action. So doing something is better than doing nothing at all, even if it's small.
I think you've already put one on. Please speak it if you want.
Tiago has his hand up.
Yago. Sorry.
Hello, good afternoon. 2 words. Disconnection, as you told us, and of course, lots of opportunities.
Opportunity. Wonderful. Thanks, Kiara, for joining. Raquel.
I was saying action for the common good.
Thanks. Travis.
I would say hopeful.
No, I don't know which of the students are actually in the space where they can unmute, but please go ahead, Olivia, if you. Okay, Haley, just tolerate just as long as about to ask her, Joanna.
I don't know if you can hear me. You can hear me.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that sometimes I see the firms and the entrepreneur talking too much about the environment and they do not really take action to protect the environment. I don't have a job related to the environment, but what I see in the world is like that. So they talk too much about the environment, but in fact, they don't really take effective action to protect the environment. I think that's what we should try to change.
Thanks. And thanks for joining, Olivia. Not hearing from Olivia. My colleagues, Daria, I think, is in Belgrade at the moment. Daria, are you?
I'm really feeling great. I hope you can hear me. But I put it in the chat. I take with me critical thinking.
Thanks, Daria. And Marietta, if you're still online. Not hearing from Marietta, but thank you very much, everyone. Just from my side, very grateful for this opportunity. Thank you so much to our panelists, to the students that are taking part, and to those that are viewing the recording. I hope that you're finding value.
Thank you.